tonight I thought I would read this. This is Traveler, National Geographic Traveler Guide to the Caribbean. If you watched I did a similar video on Japan. It's gonna be similar to that video. Only this time we're focusing on the Caribbean, which is, yeah, I think it's gonna be quite a different sort of history, I would imagine. And I think I mean, this is you can see this is it's pretty beefy, but I thought I'd read, well, the history, obviously, and then a bit about maybe the different countries. You know, I think they have sections on Jamaica and, what was it? Like the smaller French sort of colonies. I imagine they have one like Barbados and a few others as well. So I think it will be interesting, and I hope you will agree. I hope you will also find it interesting. But anyway, let's get started, shall we? History and culture. Let's begin here, shall we? And, well, I guess you've noticed by now, but I thought I'd have some chewing gum today while I'm making the video. Can let me know if you like it or if you find it unbearable. I personally find it relaxing when I'm listening to other videos. And yeah. So the Caribbean today. A Caribbean vacation is one of the most evocative phrases in the English language. The merest suggestion can unleash a stream of dreamy images featuring golden beaches, coconut palms, and azure seas. But however satisfying this daydream may be, it cannot beat the reality. The feel of powder-soft coral sand between your toes, the squawk and colorful flash of a parrot in the rainforest, the taste of a fresh mango plucked straight from the tree. Caribbean culture. Our idea of the Caribbean typically starts with the region's obvious physical attractions: the sunshine, beaches, rain-forested islands, and coral-encrusted depths. Scratch the surface, however, and you'll soon discover that the Caribbean islands are far more multi-layered and interesting. Beneath the broad brushstrokes of climate and geography, there is a cornucopia of rich and varied historical and cultural influences, which add greatly to the atmosphere and attitudes of the islands and their people. Even today, we can't interpret island culture without understanding the colonial legacy. Language, architecture, religion, festivals, and more significantly, the Caribbean people themselves can trace their origins back to the days of the region's colonial rulers. Most of the people who now inhabit the Caribbean are descended from African slaves brought here to work the plantations. Certain attitudes remain ingrained centuries later, such as the courteous greetings commonly exchanged in the French islands, and the slightly formal British influence in Barbados, where taking afternoon tea and dressing for dinner is still something of a ritual in certain circles. For all the flamboyant spectacle of carnival and rum-fueled reggae jump-ups, impromptu dances, Caribbean islanders are essentially conservative at heart. For the most part, they are friendly, helpful, and delighted to share their local knowledge. In return, they appreciate being treated with courtesy and respect. I think that goes for most people. It would be wanted to be treated with discourtesy. Anyway, sustainable tourism. The Caribbean region has around 30 separate political entities and a stable, albeit deeply fragmented, political scene. Tourism is the economic mainstay, though sugar, bananas, and oil production all contribute significantly to individual national economies. Sustainable tourism has become the buzz phrase in the Caribbean lexicon these days, and considerable efforts are being made to protect natural habitats both on land and at sea. Unfortunately, coral reefs, coastal mangrove areas, and native wildlife species have already suffered significant damage from the region's rapacious development. I think that's how you pronounce that. The growing demand for ecotourism opportunities has alerted island authorities to the importance of preserving natural resources. The growth of ecotourism has had a notably positive effect in engaging visitors with local culture. Hiking expeditions, mountain biking tours, and other activities, as well as community tourism programs, are coaxing increasing numbers of visitors out of the hotel compound and off the cruise ship to discover the charm of the islands and their people for themselves. Such forays provide a welcome bridge between residents and travelers and generate useful income for the local community, which in the past has seen the tourist dollar flow directly into the coffers of cruise lines and foreign hotel groups. And the picture here, taking the plunge off a pier in a small Martinique beach village. And Martinique, it's not a country. I'm pretty sure it's I forget the word for it. It's a French overseas territory. It has a name I forgot about. It's kind of like a colony, just with a fancier name, since it's not very attractive to call colonies nowadays, you know. The Caribbean is so beautiful, man. I know they literally just said that, you know, you shouldn't judge the Caribbean just on its physical geography, but I mean, sometimes you can't help yourself, right? And I just noticed now that the text is kind of small. Let me just... I hope that didn't make too much noise. Flora and fauna. The Caribbean's mountain ranges are cloaked in dense rainforest, which grows with explosive rapidity in the fertile volcanic soil. True rainforest is the richest natural habitat on the planet and requires an annual rainfall in excess of 70 inches, 178 centimeters, which the Caribbean islands receive courtesy of the Atlantic trade winds. In the hothouse atmosphere beneath the rainforest canopy, dozens. That was a very strange pronunciation. Dozens of ferns, creepers, and bamboo flourish at the feet of giant buttress-trunked centenary trees, as well as mahogany, gommier, and maho. At higher elevations in the montane or cloud forest, tree branches play host to a variety of bromeliads, which gain nutrients from the air, and orchids, while higher still, the lichen-encrusted elfin forest opens onto grasslands frequently visited by cool, hazy drizzle and wisps of cloud. Few mammals live in the rainforest, and indigenous species such as armadillos, opossums, and agoutis. Like, I'm sorry about my pronunciation here. There's a lot of words there I never heard before. Agoutis. Armadillos, opossums, and agoutis are rarely spotted. Reptiles, including tree frogs, iguanas, and dozens of species of small lizards, are a constant presence, as are winged insects such as butterflies and predatory mosquitoes. Oh god. That sounds wonderful. I love mosquitoes. Though there are occasional sightings of non-venomous tree snakes, the sole poisonous snake is the fer-de-lance, found only on Martinique and Saint Lucia. Sounded very elegant for a poisonous snake. Bird lovers will find an aviary Eden in the Caribbean. Several species of rare indigenous parrots live in the Windward Islands, and woodlands are also home to numerous varieties of hummingbirds, honey creepers, tanagers, and cheeky banana quits. What are these words? Seriously. Banana quits. I have no idea what that is. Banana quits, which frequently leave the rainforest to feed on the brilliant tropical blooms in nearby gardens. Is it just me or Windward Islands? That sounds like a location in a Pokemon game. Never mind. Many species of herons, waders, ducks, and other wetland birds gather in the coastal mangrove swamps of Jamaica and Trinidad, while flamingo colonies can be found in Bonaire and Lago Enriquillo in the Dominican Republic. Seabirds, including boobies, oh great, boobies, pelicans, magnificent frigate birds, and elegant scissor-tailed tropic birds, colonize rocky outcrops visible from the shore. Now YouTube's gonna think this is a very different video. Nah, it's probably fine. Just as the rainforest flourishes, so does the myriad variety of other plants and trees elsewhere on the islands. While many islanders cultivate colorful flower gardens, botanical gardens are the best place to see a whole range of eye-catching heliconias and gingers, spice trees such as nutmeg and cinnamon, and flowering trees such as the yellow or pink blossomed Bowui, scarlet poinciana, and spreading immortelle, which flowers in January and February. Once again, I'm sorry for my pronunciation. I've never heard these words before. Like if there's like a flower tree expert watching this, they would cringe so hard. Jesus. Hurricanes. Though the Caribbean experiences few climatic extremes, the region is in the hurricane zone. In recent years, hurricanes have wreaked widespread destruction across the north of the region. The official hurricane season runs from June to November, though a traditional rhyme advises June too soon, July stand by, September remember, October all over. Statistically, mid-September is the most likely time for a hurricane to pass through the Caribbean. However, cruise vessels steer well clear of the hurricane belt throughout the danger period. Let's read a little bit more about the history of the Caribbean. History and culture. Christopher Columbus first sighted the island of San Salvador in the Bahamas on October 12, 1492, and sailed into the Caribbean Sea intent on discovering a westward passage to the East Indian Spice Islands. The arrival of European explorers opened the book on the recorded history of the region, and the islands were named the Antilles after the legendary island of Antilia. Pre-Columbian Caribbean. The Caribbean's first settlers, Amerindian tribes who paddled their canoes to the islands from Central America or possibly Florida, arrived thousands of years before Columbus. The Stone Age Siboney people that's about 6,000 years old, while relics in Hispaniola are reckoned to be about 4,000 years old. These nomadic hunter-gatherers lived off of a nourishing and varied diet of fish and shellfish, birds, iguanas, and snakes. That's pretty hardcore. Supplemented by roots and wild fruits. And they crafted tools and utensils from stone, wood, bone, and shell. About 300 BC, the first Arawak migrated to the islands. They are thought to have originated in the Amazon basin, and then they pushed north to make the sea crossing from northeastern South America, present-day Venezuela and Guyana, to the southernmost of the Lesser Antilles. Gradually, they moved up the island chain, and by the time Columbus appeared on the scene, the three major Arawak groups were populating the Greater Antilles Islands and Bahamas, the Taino, Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola, the Boricua, or Borinquen, Puerto Rico, and the Lusayan, Bahamas. The Arawak were more sophisticated than the Kibone. They were farmers cultivating cassava, which means flour, yams, corns, beans, cacao. Is it called it in English? Cacao. I thought it had a different name. You say cacao in Swedish. It just sounded kind of strange in English. Oh, it's not important. I just. The Arawak were more sophisticated than the Kibone. They were farmers cultivating cassava for flour, yams, corn, beans, cacao, peanuts, tobacco, and cotton. Skilled hunters and fishermen, they were also potters capable of producing earthenware for domestic and religious purposes. Arawak society was well organized. Villages were generally built close to the shore, and each community was presided over by a cacique, or village chieftain, who was responsible for both the temporal and religious life of the villagers. At the center of the village was a large open-sided carbe, a thatched shelter, where the cacique and men held council. It was out of bounds to women and children, except by invitation to attend special ceremonies. Unmarried men could sleep here or in a separate carbe, stringing maybe 100 hammocks from the roof. Religion played an important part in Arawak daily life. There were gods associated with food crops, fertility and weather, and benevolent spirits that inhabited plants and animals. Religious ceremonies included snorting, trance-inducing narcotics, and dancing. That sounds pretty wild. As well as the worship of zemi, simple shapes or human and animal figures made of wood, bone, or stone. Arawak believed in the afterlife and took great care with burial rituals. The dead were placed in a squatting position and were equipped with personal belongings. The wives of important chieftains were buried alive. That was just casually mentioned. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, wait, they were buried alive. Oh, that's not terrifying at all. Jesus. As well as food for the journey to Coyaba, a plentiful land of non-stop dancing and feasting. Arrival of the Carib. After 1,000 years, the Arawak's peaceful existence came to an abrupt end with the arrival of the Carib. Also from South America, the warlike Carib progressed northward through the Lesser Antilles, slaughtering Arawak Arawak men and assimilating women and children into their tribes. Though the evidence is somewhat sketchy, the Carib had a reputation for cannibalism and were said to barbecue, a Carib word, their male victims, which included Europeans as they began to explore the region. The Carib were excellent marksmen with bows and arrows and fearlessly attacked Spanish sailing ships from their wooden war canoes, or piraguas. And there's a 1562 Spanish map of the Americas. It's fairly accurate, isn't it? South America looks a little chunky, but I mean, it's a huge continent, but it's a little too triangular, I guess. But the Caribbean looks very, see here. You can tell they've mapped, especially, I think this is Hispaniola, right, with Cuba. This looks just like it, pretty much. It continues from here. Wooden war canoes, or piraguas, from which the simple pirogue fishing boats still used in the Windward Islands take their name. Eventually, the Europeans pushed the Carib back into the rugged terrain of the Windward Islands, where they managed to hold out for more than 200 years. A few mixed blood survivors still live on Dominica and St. Vincent. Seriously, the Windward Island sounds like an RPG island. European invasion. Columbus made 4 voyages to the Caribbean in his attempt to discover a western route to the East Indies, stubbornly naming his finds the West Indies, despite all the evidence to the contrary. On his 4th voyage, in 1502, he located the South American mainland and secured its vast mineral wealth for the Roman Catholic kings of Spain. However, he failed to make it back through the Caribbean islands, beaching his aging ships in Jamaica. He was forced to rely upon the hostile governor of Hispaniola for eventual rescue. During the early 16th century, Spanish settlements sprang up in the Greater Antilles, first in Hispaniola, then During the early 16th century, Spanish settlements sprang up in the Greater Antilles, first in Hispaniola, then Cuba, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico. The Arawak were enslaved, and within 50 years the indigenous population of these northern islands had been eradicated through warfare, disease, and transportation to work the mainland gold mines. It's pretty insane how, I mean, it was, like they say here, it was a lot of warfare, that, contributed to, the rapidly decreasing numbers of Native Americans after the Europeans arrived. But I find it, is there a word for something that's, like fascinating, but in a bad way? Because I find it, because it was illness that took out most of them, and I find it so fascinating in a bad way, I guess, that illnesses can be so like unique to a certain area in the world, so that a certain population can be completely fine, pretty much, against and defended against an illness, and just being in which, when they arrived, in Americas, Europeans, how devastating these could be. I find it, I mean, it's horrific, but it's also, what I'm trying to say is I find it, like the, what do you say? illnesses and infections can be when you're not prepared for it. I didn't word that well, but I think I got my thoughts across. But anyway, let's continue. I'm sorry for rambling a bit. The Spanish treasure fleets making their way home to Europe acted as a magnet for pirates and privateers. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, French, English, and Dutch vessels lurking in the isolated cays of the Virgin Islands preyed mercilessly on heavily laden armadas. The next logical step for the interlopers was to claim colonies of their own in the region, which became easier as Spanish influence declined in Europe during the 17th century. The English and French moved in on the Lesser Antilles, commencing a 250-year struggle for dominance in the Eastern Caribbean, and the Dutch cannily selected islands with a view to their strategic importance on the trading routes used by their rivals. I don't know how to pronounce this. The Quebec Merchant, centuries after Columbus sailed the ocean blue, hired pirates. That was kind of hard to say. The genteelly known as privateers made a booming business out of raiding treasure-laden merchant and pirate ships. In 1698, privateer Captain Kidd captured the Quebec Merchant with its bounty of gold, silver, silk, and opium in the Indian Ocean. Kidd made off with the loot, scuttling the ship just off tiny Catalina Island in the Dominican Republic. The Quebec merchants remain still lie where Kidd left them, in just 10 feet, 3 meters of water, and are slated to become an underwater museum in the future. Colonial era. Sugarcane was introduced to the Caribbean by Dutch planters from Brazil in the 1630s. From small-scale beginnings in Barbados, the enormously profitable trade in white gold triggered the rapid expansion of European colonialism in the region, and its labor-intensive cultivation brought an immediate demand for a cheap and inexhaustible workforce. Spanish settlers had imported small numbers of West African slaves to work their Caribbean plantations since the early days, but the sugar trade boosted numbers to unprecedented levels. Untold millions of Africans were sold into slavery and shipped across the Atlantic to work the sugar plantations. Fastest man alive, sprinter Usain Bolt leaves Jamaica's soon-come reputation in the dust. I'm not sure how old this one is. I don't even know if he is the fastest one in the world anymore. Well, I mean, he's probably pretty fast anyway, but yeah. By the start of the 19th century, the importance of the Caribbean sugar trade dwindled as sugar beet production in Europe rose to satisfy local demand. The planters' profits decreased, and in 1808 the anti-slavery movement in Britain succeeded in banning the slave trade to the colonies. This was followed in 1834 by the Emancipation Act, which outlawed the ownership of slaves. The other European nations followed suit, and the former sugar colonies fell into a decline. As the freed slaves abandoned the plantations, major producers such as Jamaica and Trinidad imported East Indian indentured laborers, but most islands slipped quietly into the doldrums, largely forgotten by their erstwhile colonial masters. Modern era. The Spanish-American War of 1898 introduced U.S. influence to the region. The U.S. claimed its first territory with the capture of Puerto Rico from Spain in that year. It followed up this belated foray into Caribbean empire building with the purchase of the U.S. Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917. The Caribbean islands experienced the unwanted trickle-down effect of the 1930s Great Depression, which deepened the region's economic problems and heralded the rise of grassroots labor movements. These in turn spearheaded the island's transition towards greater independence from Europe. In 1962, Jamaica was the first British colony to achieve full independence, and Britain divested most of its colonies during the 1970s and 1980s. Several smaller islands. What? Oh, I got a little confused there. Several smaller islands opted to remain crown colonies, now known as British Overseas Territories. Yeah, there's the fancier term again. While others have joined the British Commonwealth as independent states. The Dutch and French retain closer political ties with their colonies. Colonial legacy. As European colonists staked their claims to the Caribbean islands, each nation attempted in some degree to recreate a miniature home away from home in the sun. Thus, the Spanish Catholic heritage is readily apparent in the historic cities and churches of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. The ex-British colonies in the Leeward and Windward Islands are rich in foursquare stone Georgian architecture. The French islands retain an inimitable, savoir-faire combined with gastronomic flair. And in the Dutch Leewards, Curaçao's elegantly gabled buildings have been designated a World Heritage Site. Language is another long-standing legacy of the former colonial powers. English, French, Dutch, and Spanish are the dominant languages you'll hear in the region. The majority of Caribbean people are of African origin, and although African culture was subjugated by European customs during the colonial era, it did not disappear altogether. Freed from Old World dominance, the African heritage is now the strongest element of pan-Caribbean cultural trends. Its influence is unmistakable in music, traditional cooking, and the common animist beliefs that operate alongside traditional European religions in a very typically Caribbean compromise. Music. Music is, so they say, the heartbeat of the Caribbean, and it is certainly hard to ignore. The strains of calypso, reggae, and soca, soul calypso, are everywhere. Steel pan or throbbing bass dub music booms out from the dollar buzzes, and the dance rhythms of Puerto Rican salsa, merengue from the Dominican Republic, and zouk from the French Antilles provide a catchy backdrop to the Caribbean experience. Calypso is the grandfather of the music scene, with its origins buried way back in West African slave traditions. Forbidden to speak their native languages, slaves were, however, permitted to sing. The planters believed it helped them work faster. Yet unbeknownst to their employers, the slaves used song to keep alive the West African storytelling tradition and to pass along information and messages of protest concealed in allegorical terms. Today's Calypsonians Calypso singers are still judged not only on their music, but also on the message they put across. Trinidad is the home of Calypso and steel pan music, which originated in the dockyards of Port of Spain during World War II, when oil drums were recycled for makeshift drums. Reggae emerged from the Kingston ghetto of Trenchtown, Jamaica, spearheaded by its most famous exponent, Bob Marley, who with his group, the Wailers, went on to enjoy worldwide success in the 1970s. Live music performances in clubs and bars are easy to find throughout the islands. Music festivals are also well worth tracking down. The most famous events include Jamaica's Reggae Sumfest, July, the St. Lucia International Jazz Festival, May, and the St. Kitts Music Festival in June. language. There's a little bit more about the language here. English, Spanish, French, and Dutch are all spoken in the Caribbean, a legacy from colonial days. English is spoken in the lion's share of the Caribbean islands, from Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and Turks and Caicos Islands in the north, through the Virgin, Leeward, and Windward Islands, where a form of French, what's this word, patois, I think it's patois, is also commonly spoken on Dominica and St. Lucia. To Trinidad and Tobago. Most Spanish-speaking Puerto Ricans also speak English, but a Spanish phrase book is essential in non-tourist areas of the Dominican Republic. Dutch Caribbean islanders are generally bilingual in Dutch and English. Visitors to the French Antilles should be aware that little English is spoken outside of the upscale hotels. Jamaica. The Taino Indians who settled Jamaica named it Jaimaca, land of wood and water, a description that still rings true if you venture off the tourist trail today. The island's mountainous heartland remains largely untouched despite centuries of colonial rule, beginning with the Spanish occupation of 1510. Most Jamaicans trace their ancestry to slaves brought to plantations during the 17th and 18th centuries, and lively, opinionated Jamaican culture is a vibrant fusion of African and European influences. Under British rule, the slave trade boomed, providing a labor force for the sugar plantations. Jamaica also served as a haven for pirates and buccaneers, encouraged by the British to make Kingston's Port Royal their base for harassing the Spanish fleets. Slave rebellions were a prominent feature of Jamaica's history until emancipation in 1834. The island became a British Crown colony in 1866, and during the 1890s, the first tourists arrived on banana boats from North America. The Great Depression of the 1930s led to bloodshed and riots as the economy faltered, giving birth to the country's first labor union and the Socialistic People's National Party, PNP, led by Norman Manley. Universal suffrage was granted in 1944, and in 1962 Jamaica won full independence. Jamaica's culture is a potent brew of fierce national pride, reggae and Rastafarians, sassy attitudes, and a local dialect known as Jamaican patois. I think it's patois anyway. If it's pronounced like patois or something, I'm gonna sound kind of silly. The poverty and lack of opportunity that led to political unrest and occasional riots of the past still affect much of the island. Cayman Islands. The low-lying Cayman Islands are situated in the Western Caribbean, some 480 miles or 772 kilometers southwest of Miami. There are 3 islands in this British overseas territory, each different in character. The biggest, Grand Cayman, is the home of the capital, Georgetown. About 90 miles, 145 kilometers to the northeast lie the 2 sister islands of Little Cayman and Cayman Brac, both comparatively undeveloped. The first European sighting of the islands was by Columbus on May 10th, 1503, when he was blown off course on his way to Hispaniola. The explorer spotted the 2 smaller islands, Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. Although he didn't stop to explore, Columbus noted the enormous numbers of turtles in the surrounding waters and named the islands Las Tortugas. Over the next 100 years or so, they came to be known as Las Caymanas, from the Carib name for the saltwater crocodiles that were also abundant around the islands. In the 16th century, Dutch, French, English, and Spanish, the usual suspects, sailors stopped at these islands to replenish their freshwater supplies and capture sea turtles, a plentiful source of fresh meat for the long return sea voyage back to Europe. Even though Sir Francis Drake visited Grand Cayman in 1586 and reported that the caimans were edible, the islands remained unclaimed and uninhabited. The Cayman Islands came under English jurisdiction in 1655, when England wrested Jamaica and neighboring islands from the Spanish. They were formally recognized as English territory. They were formally recognized as English territory in 1670. In the mid-1660s, the first settlers arrived from Jamaica, setting up semi-permanent habitations on Little Cayman and Cayman Brac to trade turtles, vegetables, water, wood, and coconuts with passing ships. Grand Cayman, which offered better protection from pirate attacks, was settled from 1700. Puerto Rico, the most easterly of the Greater Antilles. Puerto Rico lies about 1,000 miles, or 1,600 kilometers southeast of Miami, between the Virgin Islands and the island of Hispaniola. Almost rectangular in shape, it spans 112 miles, 180 kilometers from east to west, and 40 miles, 65 kilometers from north to south. A mountain range, the Cordillera Central, runs across the center of the island, reaching its highest point at the Cerro de Punta at 4,387 feet, or 1,338 meters. Lively and engaging, the island of enchantment is a happy marriage of cultural contradictions, sun-kissed beaches, lush rainforests, buzzing cities, and sedate upcountry coffee estancias. While Puerto Rican culture is distinctly sassy and Latin American in inspiration, the island's commercial life is organized with American efficiency. You can zip from one side of the island to the other in a matter of hours along slick 4-lane highways, but turn off into the countryside and be prepared to slow down dramatically as you bounce down a potholed rural road to nowhere in particular. Puerto Rico's interior is partially clad in dense tropical rainforest, although just 1% of the island's original forest now remains. The central mountains are ringed by coastal plains. In the northwest, the landscape is shaped by the strange hillocks and caves of limestone karst formations, while in the drier southwest, the land is dominated by cactus and other drought-resistant plants. To the native Taino, the island was known as Boriken, or Land of the Noble Lord. When Columbus arrived here on his second voyage to the Americas in 1493, he named it San Juan Bautista. With him was Juan Ponce de Leon, who later returned to settle the island in 1508. He soon renamed it Puerto Rico, or Rich Port. The Spanish enslaved the island's 30,000 Taino and set them to work in the gold mines. The native population was decimated. Once the gold was exhausted in the late 16th century, Spain neglected the island until 1765, when King Carlos III sent an envoy to develop the island's sugar plantations. Trade began to pick up, and coffee and tobacco were also exported. In 1897, the United States, then at war with Spain, invaded the island. Puerto Rico was ceded to the United States in December 1898, and U.S. citizenship granted to two islanders in 1917. Citizens of an overseas Commonwealth of the United States since 1952, the electorate rejected a proposal to induct Puerto Rico as the 51st State of the Union in 1998. Although Spanish is the island's first language, English is ubiquitous in tourist areas and in the capital, San Juan, home to almost a third of Puerto Rico's 3.9 million residents. San Juan is a major regional transportation hub, hosting thousands of cruise passengers every day and providing air links to destinations throughout the Caribbean. Puerto Rico's many and varied landscapes and excellent road network invite exploration, and this is one of the few Caribbean islands where you shouldn't hesitate to rent a car and travel independently. As the last thing for tonight, let's read a little bit about the coral reefs of the Caribbean. Beneath Caribbean waters lies the complex and colorful environment of coral reefs. This mysterious, enchantingly beautiful world more than matches the terrestrial flora and fauna of the islands. It is second only to the rainforests in terms of biological diversity. The coral reef. Coral reefs have existed for 450 million years, making them among the oldest ecosystems on the planet. These remarkable structures have been built up over the centuries by tiny coral animals, or polyps, which convert sunlight and the carbon dioxide from seawater into calcium carbonate with the help of captive partners known as zooxanthellae plants that live within their tissues. The polyps use this calcium carbonate, or limestone, to build the stony structure in which they live. This symbiotic relationship functions only in warm, clear, tropical waters where there is enough sunlight for the zooxanthellae to perform. Like reefs all over the world, Caribbean reefs are subject to numerous stresses, including anchor damage, pollution, sedimentation, and coral bleaching caused by ocean warming. Marine tourism can help to preserve coral reefs, but snorkelers and divers must play their part by not touching the corals while underwater and not buying marine souvenirs. The Caribbean is home to around 50 species of hard corals. Each builds its own unique structure. Among the more familiar are the brain corals, which can grow up to 6 feet, 1.8 meters, across and resemble a human brain. Staghorn corals, which branch out like deer antlers. Elkhorn corals, which form dense patches in the surf zone. Star corals, which are important reef builders. Pillar corals, whose distinctive pillars can grow up to 10 feet or 3 meters high. And boulder corals, which are found almost everywhere. There are also about 20 species of soft corals, the most prominent of which are large sea fans, or gorgonians. Others include black corals, sea whips, sea blooms, and sea rods. Colorful sponges of all descriptions, delicate azure vase sponges, blood red barrel sponges, and bright yellow tube sponges are another important component in the dynamic reef environment, playing host to tiny invertebrates or providing hiding places for fish. Reef fish. The Caribbean is home to about 1,000 species of fish, belonging to more than 140 families. Many of them display a dazzling array of colors as they school around the reef. Among the most common are butterfly fish, particularly the four-eyed and banded butterfly fish, and angelfish, such as the magnificent queen angelfish, the yellow and gray French angelfish, and the black and yellow rock beauty. Damselfish are at home on the shallow reefs, darting out from their hiding places in the coral to graze on algae. One species of damselfish, the striped sergeant major, lays its eggs in round patches and defends them aggressively against all comers. The Wrasse family are prime scavengers on the reef, and their behavior is full of surprises. The male rule a harem of females, but should the dominant male get eaten, then one of the females changes sex to take his place. That's pretty fascinating. Closely related to the wrasses are the brightly colored parrotfish, 14 species of which live in the Caribbean. Parrotfish feed off algae on the coral rock, grinding up surprisingly large quantities of coral with their powerful jaws and then expelling it as coral sand. That's going to be it for tonight. I hope you found it relaxing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again on my next video.